Gordon and I were as close as two people could ever be in politics. I had a deep respect for him and affection for him that no amount of squabbling could ever erase.
We had this shared ideal that we could create a Labour Party that was once again capable of winning elections. I defy people to say that this was not a constructive partnership.
Sometimes the revolution is a quiet revolution, but a revolution nonetheless it is.
Together they were unbeatable. They were literally the Lennon and McCartney of Labour politics.
Are we starting?
We'll start, yeah.
People had never seen anything like this from the Labour Party. People felt, heavens, something's happening here. You know, something really is changing.
Under Tony Blair's leadership, we can build the new Great Britain of great opportunity for all. Join us on our journey.
Tony Blair is to be Prime Minister and a landslide is likely.
There was a sense that a new type of progressive politics could shape the future.
A new dawn has broken, has it not?
The first leader in the Labour Party's 100 years to lead them to a second full term.
I feel the hand of history upon our shoulder.
We have been prudent for a purpose, a stronger, fairer Britain.
This was one public execution where the executioner and the condemned sat together as friends.
Peter actually said, you know, what I love about Tony's is utter ruthlessness and his selfishness. And he could be ruthless. He could be ruthless.
We'll bring this government down.
Financial markets around the world went into free fall today.
Is there any other job in the cabinet you'd like to do apart from being Chancellor?
I'm not going to be drawn into that.
Gordon would be saying, when are you going to go? When are you going to let me be Prime Minister?
It was a tragedy. It's a story as old as the hills. The prince couldn't wait for the king to die.
To have to report the death of the Right Honourable John Smith, QC.
Gordon Brown has ruled himself out of the contest.
Tony Blair is elected leader for Labour.
Mr. Brown, having wanted to step in for so long, now gets the opportunity.
And welcome to our election results programme. If our figures are right, the Prime Minister's going to have a landslide with a majority of about 146 over all other parties in the new House of Commons. That'll be about the same as the majority that the Labour Party had in 1945.
I think the way to do it, you know, is to wait and see when we've got a few more results.
Mr. Foote refusing to be drawn, a wise man at this stage in the proceedings.
For many months before the 83 defeat, I and just about everybody else had seen this inevitable advancing disaster coming towards us.
The Conservatives took a very safe Labour seat in Nottingham.
A lost deposit for Labour.
Thatcher might be wrong, but she was strong.
Tony Benn was ousted from Bristol East by a Tory majority of nearly 2,000.
Labour Party policy invited derision on the doorstep.
This is the end of an era in which the Labour Party was an important element in politics.
The Labour Party neglected the main agenda of politics. We infuriated people.
Now, the map of the country is building up very fast now. There are only 2 Labour seats left in the south of England outside London.
I fought the 1983 election in what was, after all, a Labour heartland seat. And I won it, but with a small majority, really. Every second doorstep, people were saying to me, I vote Labour because otherwise my dad would turn in his grave, but I'm telling you, you're in the wrong place, you guys, and you've got to sort yourselves out.
No, 1983 election was a disaster. It was Labour's worst performance since the 1930s. Our policies were out of tune with our values. fairness, social responsibility, tolerance were all things that people could accept, but our policies no longer reflected them.
For Labour, it was the party's elderly image that rankled most.
The image of the Labour Party's got to be an image that's more dynamic, more modern, more suited to the 1980s. I don't actually think it's nearly so much a matter of right and left as people make it out. What I do think is that it's a matter of style.
So when I came in 1983, there were a group of people who understood that change was needed, and the person who was absolutely outstanding was Gordon.
There were very few of us elected in 1983, and there was very few young people in the Parliamentary Labour Party.
How important are Labour's plans for more public investment and for creating a Scottish Assembly?
Well, I ended up in the same windowless office with Tony. Tony was a barrister. He had not, like me, had the experience of being chairman of the Labour Party in Scotland, or being a candidate since 1976, or being on the Scottish executive, but he was very determined to learn.
I had a whole lot of thoughts, but I was naive politically, and Gordon was a complete soulmate because he understood politics much better than me.
I think I persuaded him to support Neil Kinnock for the leader.
The Labour Party has tonight elected Neil Kinnock as leader and Roy Hattersley as deputy.
We had this shared ideal that we could create a Labour Party that was once again capable of winning elections, which it didn't seem to be able to do at that time.
We were constantly debating and discussing. It was a deep intellectual dive virtually every day.
There were Tony and Gordon, 2 desks, Gordon's paper everywhere, piles of paper. You could scarcely get into the room.
If we hadn't been that close, sitting there in that tiny little windowless office, yeah, well, New Labour would certainly have never been formed in the way it was.
Gordon and Tony were such a close pair, but they were also very different. And part of that was Gordon had grown up in the Scottish Labour Party.
It's impossible to understand Gordon Brown, the politician, without understanding where Gordon Brown came from.
In the southeast corner of the county and looking out on the North Sea is Kirkcaldy.
Gordon grew up listening to his father preach from the Bible in his church in Kirkcaldy, his hometown, where his father was a Church of Scotland minister.
I still remember, age of 12, 2 streets away from us, a textile factory, the last 400 jobs going. People thrown on the dole queue, and then all the pits, the mines closing. And I kept thinking to myself, surely this unemployment is avoidable, surely we can do something about poverty. And that's, I think, what has influenced me all along.
The University of Edinburgh. Its rectors have included Gladstone, Lloyd George and Churchill. But its present rector is the youngest and most radical yet, a 24-year-old student. Gordon Brown has new and controversial ideas about how a university should be run.
Well, it's like any democratic system that those who've got to bear the brunt of decisions taken should have the chance to have their say. Unfortunately, the university isn't always as democratic as it should be.
But do you think that
Gordon was an extraordinarily talented figure. This is a man who went to Edinburgh University aged 16, had been awarded the best first-class honours at Edinburgh University in history since the war.
Brown's radical ideas have antagonised many of his court colleagues.
Student rectors seem to think that once they are rector, that this is equivalent to being prime minister.
And getting a job these days is as much a lottery as playing the fruit machines.
I first met Gordon in the late 1970s in the Scottish Labour and Trade Union movement.
The last thing we can do is throw up our hands and run away. It would be like the Salvation Army taking to its heels on the Day of Judgment.
Who instantaneously struck me as a very impressive young man. an effortlessly impressive young man.
Gordon was a politician to his fingertips. But I think Tony was a bit easier to get on with. He was a bit softer, a bit gentler. He'd have a laugh more easily. He wouldn't take things quite as seriously as Gordon. In their early years, I'd meet them for a cup of tea and have a chat. They wanted to be part of the action.
Tony, obviously a smart young chap, dedicated, very hardworking, and that impression of eagerness, the Bambi bit of Blair, I suppose you'd call it, was what mainly struck me. This guy was just wanting to get on with the battle.
Tony Blair wasn't like many of us in the Labour Party who came from the working class and perhaps felt lacking a little in confidence because of that. That wasn't the case with him. I think Tony had a very strong, very, very strong sense of self-belief.
Tony was something of an expert at testing rules to the limit. He was the sort of boy, you know, that you were always struggling with to have his hair cut properly.
When I first went to university, I was completely uninterested in politics. If you told me before the age of 20 that I was going to be in politics, I would have been absolutely horrified. I was far more interested in, frankly, rock music, having a good time, enjoying myself.
I got to Oxford in '71, and Tony arrived in 1972. He had a very unusual and eclectic group of friends. His best friend there was a guy called Peter Thompson, who was a sort of muscular Christian vicar. The only vicar I'd ever met that wore a dog collar and sort of rolled his own cigarettes and downed his pint. And his other great friend, Jeff Gallup, was a sort of international Marxist. You know, he was extreme left, you know, for the overthrow of capitalism. And they introduced Tony to socialism.
I read law, which was a mistake because I found it very boring as an academic subject. But by my late 20s, I was full on and flat out as a lawyer. I'd never been to the House of Commons. And I always remember going into the lobby into this vast, cavernous marble lobby. And it was a very odd thing. Just the moment I stepped in, I thought, I've got to be here. That kind of moment of epiphany, if you like, that this was what I was going to do.
Welcome to this weekly hour of topical argument and debate, and around the question time table tonight, Tony Blair MP. In May 1982, he lost his deposit in the Beaconsfield by-election. In June 1983, he was elected to the safe Labour seat of Sedgefield in County Durham.
Part of what I was thinking about even back then, I looked at the history of the Labour Party and concluded, you know, it was the right idea but badly executed. We were rooted in an old-style collectivism around a big state, nationalisation, trade union power, and the world had moved on.
The police were involved in some of the most vicious hand-to-hand fighting of the entire miners' dispute.
Get in here and see what they're doing.
In what I could call the formative years of Tony and Gordon, the 80s, the whole Labour movement was utterly absorbed by the issues relating to the miners' strike.
The miners' strike has cost Neil Kinnock dearly.
The public saw Labour as this macho bunch who had nothing to do with them, who would nationalise everything, tax everything, ruin the economy.
We had the term loony left, and the miners' strike, Arthur Scargill, all those things coming on the television screens night after night after night. This was the Labour Party, and people didn't like it.
Are you going to accept it down on your knees? Or are you going to stand and fight and oppose the closure and the butchery of your industry?
I remember listening to Arthur Scargill at the time and thinking, this world's changed and the mines are going to go. And in the end, there's going to be no future for us if we keep just living in the past.
Come on, no way.
Because the normal working class people were a million miles away from these folk.
I knew that if we were going to recover respect and trust from the people who had always voted for us, we were going to have to change policy stances. My objective was to secure significant changes in whole areas of Labour Party policy and presentation.
I think our main task is to get over the party's message much more professionally, much more effectively than we've been doing for several years now.
Part of what we had to do to make Labour look like a modern, exciting party was to transform the image.
Okay. The best communications are those which are delivered directly, succinctly and straight.
I mean, that's my inclination to say, trust us. Come home to Labour, trust us. We are the moral majority. That's right.
And we won't let you down.
Right.
We won't let you down.
I only narrowly got the job. I think it was about 13 votes to 11 with 2 abstentions. The problem was that although I had come from television, I wasn't a PR expert. My instincts were strong. The first thing we did was haul down the Labour Party emblem, which was the red flag, redolent of Soviet Union, communism, and we replaced it with the red rose.
We've introduced a new campaigning emblem for the party to take with us through to the general election, through to victory. An emblem which expresses the new vigour, the new confidence of the party.
People had never seen anything like this from the Labour Party. What we were trying to do very quickly was to make people feel, heavens, something's happening here. Something really is changing.
The single most important thing always in politics is to have the initiative. For the agenda, the dominating agenda, to be the one you set. And I could see it was still the one set by Margaret Thatcher in '87.
Good evening and welcome to election night.
Margaret Hilda Thatcher.
We could point to all the things the Tories had done wrong and we could criticise her, but I remember thinking, if I was her sitting there looking at this, would I think I had some big idea coming the other way that made me frightened? No.
The Conservatives have won the 1987 general election and will lead Britain into the 1990s with a parliamentary majority of over 100 seats.
People said it was a brilliant campaign, and we won the campaign but lost the election. I didn't see it that way. I saw it as we may have won on presentation, but we lost completely on policy. We were still millions of votes short of where we needed to be.
I realised then, in 1987, that wonderful communications can only take you so far. It's your policies that take you past the winning post. And the public simply did not trust us on trade union power, they didn't trust us on tax, they didn't trust us on spending, they didn't trust us on defence.
It registered with me. There's something fundamentally wrong. And I could see that in my own constituency party. Coming to Sedgefield after spending years in the London Labour Party was just the most wonderful revelation.
Right from the start, he didn't give us the party line. I said, Tony, policy says we're going to nationalise the top 300 companies. I said, we're going to nationalise Marks and Spencer. He just said, oh, John, he said, I know, it's a problem, it's a great problem. Sedgefield, it's been a mining constituency, the mines were closing, and so the constituency had changed. People wanted a new way of life, and Tony appreciated that.
I suppose it's pretty hectic practically every weekend, but to me, the constituency is the base. And so it's time that's well spent, and this is very much a community place as well. Everyone's got their own village and community, and life revolves around that, and I find that very good.
He came up every weekend to stay with me, and my daughter used to have to get out of and sleep on the floor in the other bedroom.
Tony Blair is doing what he says he likes doing best, helping people with problems.
Hi, nice to see you. Have you been in touch with...
Everybody that met him, they loved him. And what he was talking was what the people out there really felt.
Have we got all these questions done then?
Yeah.
I tell you, one of the mistakes that people often make is that they think everyone, you know, has this sort of romantic nostalgia about the past. They don't. What they actually are addressing most of their lives is a better future for themselves.
Tony had begun to ask some fairly fundamental and searching questions about the Labour Party, ones that I don't think Gordon would ever really have posed.
Okay.
As soon as you hear the buzzword social justice, we need to be here.
Okay.
What Gordon had was a terrific 24/7 ability just to tear into the Tories.
The Conservatives have no conception of social justice. They've got no theory of just distribution.
I mean, he just didn't view them as political opponents. They were sort of battlefield adversaries.
Manufacture or die.
Hang on a second, Mr. Tischer.
But Tony was actually asking himself whether there weren't some things that the Tories had perhaps got right. People say they were like two peas in a pod. I'm not sure that that's true. If you were to take what later became known as New Labour, Tony was much more new, Gordon was much more Labour.
Gordon's performance was always of the highest quality. He was a very, very good performer in the House of Commons.
There you go. Right.
I thought that he should be on the front bench as quickly as possible.
It's everywhere. It's north, south, east, west. It's retailing, it's servicing, it's manufacturing. It's everywhere.
High tech, traditional. John Smith was my friend. We had a great group of Scottish members of Parliament, and I was very much a younger member of this group. So John was, in a sense, a mentor. We really did work together very closely, and you know, you spent hours and hours going up and down on trains to London is bound to be the case.
John was due to be our spokesperson at a really big parliamentary event. John had a heart attack. I had no hesitation in saying to Gordon, "Will you do it?" And he sort of froze for a second or two and said, "Yes, if that's what's needed."
To give it to Gordon was a big promotion. That job could have gone to another person in the shadow cabinet. So that was a recognition of the work that Gordon had been doing.
The man who'll be facing the Chancellor directly across the chamber this afternoon is Labour's Treasury spokesman Gordon Brown.
We have got the worst inflation in Europe, and we have got...
I mean, I always had huge confidence in him, but it's when you come to show it in that tense and testing theatre of Parliament that really makes the difference.
Statement, Mr. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Cabinet today agreed the government...
I felt like some old colonel sending off a young second lieutenant into the jungle.
Mr. Speaker. I could see it was boom and bust that was about to hit the British economy, and his arrogance and his complacency and self-satisfaction were all a problem for him.
In the month that the Chancellor should affirm a new round of top-rate tax cuts for those who are already rich, he still refuses to find even the tiny amounts that would save free eyesight tests and dental checkups, even for pensioners.
It was an extraordinary performance, electrifying performance, actually. And I remember thinking, this is just amazing. I mean, this is what we need.
Over cuts in housing, cuts in...
This young member of Parliament produced this truly great oratory.
Ill-equipped and ill-prepared for the...
He was mighty.
one political commentator said to me, he said, "We've seen a star born today." And he was right. And that's why people started thinking of Gordon from that time on as a future leader.
Here now, your very own on-the-record guide to 1988's heart-stopping chart toppers.
Down but not out, John Prescott. At number 9, this year's highest new entry, Tony Blair. John Smith's up 3 places to number 2. And up 10, brand new at number 1, it's Gordon Brown.
Tony and Gordon shared an amazing friendship. They just sparked each other up in exactly the right way. And it was just amazing to be in the room with them at that time, and people were always popping in. You got Peter Mandelson popping in.
Are we starting?
We'll start, yeah, but we just want general informal chat.
Right, okay. One thing I do...
Peter would, come in and say, "Hello, boys. What are we up to today, then?"
I see it. Living standards having been hit in the summer, quality of life is going to be hit in the autumn and winter.
Yeah.
The public spending...
Neither Tony or Gordon did anything without consulting Peter. They worked really, really closely together.
By this time, the three of us were operating like a trio of musketeers. They knew what the line was, they took the message, they knew how to deliver it. I have to say, not every member of the Shadow Cabinet was quite the same sort of TV material.
Obviously, that caused some problems. I do recall in the office us having to deal with angry members of the Shadow Cabinet who said they weren't getting quite as much airtime as Tony and Gordon.
They always wear roses every time they meet.
Very expensive.
They were like two sides of the same coin. They gave everything up for each other all the time. And they would just sit, the two of them, working on either Tony's debate he had to do the following week or Gordon's.
I always say Gordon taught me how to make a speech.
It gives me great pleasure to call on Tony Blair.
We now move on to the debate on industrial relations, and Tony Blair, who after
the first time I addressed the Labour Party conference was when I was employment spokesman.
was appointed employment spokesman, will now move...
I remember showing Gordon the speech the night before.
Every other country in Europe, every other, offers some form of minimum wage protection. But one, Britain.
It had all the policies there, but, when it came to the minimum wage, it was like sort of... the Conservatives say the minimum wage is going to have a bad impact on jobs, but hearing the following 5 reasons, and this is why that's not true. And I remember Gordon looking at it and say, "You're not in front of a High Court judge, you're in front of the Labour Party conference. Right? This is what you do. You say, for 100 years, the Labour Party has campaigned for a minimum wage."
So that the campaign that began 100 years ago for a decent minimum level of pay shall be achieved successfully.
From day one of the next Labour government, we will introduce a bill that, so on. He schooled me so well that I was completely unprepared for the enormous reception it got, and I actually lost my place halfway through the speech because I was so...
And that is why it is so essential that we realise this is now such a party. We will be such a government.
Tony Blair, with an upbeat presentation of Labour's new framework of law. He takes a well-earned glass of water.
But I remember coming off the stage afterwards thinking, yeah, so that's how you make a speech.
They performed their portfolio duties brilliantly. Tony, almost physically, in his suit, his appearance, his tie, the way he spoke. And Gordon, in terms of a tank-like intellectual domination of the discourse. You knew that Gordon Brown was not going to just be well thought of, but a great figure.
1, lights. Mix to 3, Mike.
Good evening. The 1992 election campaign is underway.
The Conservatives say a vote for Labour is a vote for tax increases.
Neil Kinnock says the calculation's a fantasy by a chancellor who can't count.
2 opinion polls tonight both give Labour a 5-point lead over the Conservatives.
I'd managed to secure significant changes in whole areas of Labour Party policy.
Now is the time for change. Now is the time for Labour.
I thought we were going to win.
In a few moments' time, the polls will close all over the country.
I think we're going to do extremely well as the results come in during the evening. I think we'll certainly be the largest party.
10 o'clock, and our view is it's going to be a hung parliament. This election is too close to call.
I never actually believed we'd win the 1992 election. I always thought the hurdle was too great.
Good evening. John Major has defied the pollsters and led the Conservatives to victory.
We had to prove that we were competent on the economy, and it wasn't seen that way in 1992. And so after all the effort that Neil Kinnock had, to his great credit, made, we have a long way to go.
So many people in our country, they deserve better than they got on the 9th of April, 1992.
Everybody was in tears. It was like Groundhog Day. He did say then that this was now a time for somebody else to take it forward. He'd done as much as he could, but actually, this was it.
Mr. Kinnock, what are your personal plans now? Mr. Kinnock, BBC Television News, do you intend to stay on?
The morning after the election, the question was who went and did the morning programmes on TV. And frankly, people were so despondent about the result, there weren't really many takers. And I hadn't really slept much, but I was sitting there thinking, and I phoned up Labour HQ and said, I'll do whatever you want. I'll go on any of them.
If you couldn't win in a recession like this, you could never win, could you?
No, I don't believe that you can say that. I think we had an enormous task, always did, in coming from the position we were in 1987.
This idea that because Labour has been defeated in this election, that there is some way in which you say Labour can never win again. Nonsense.
As I did that, and I remember thinking, John Major got the biggest vote of any Tory leader in the last, I don't know, 30 years, I think. More people voted for him than voted for Margaret Thatcher. So I thought, they're not happy with us yet. That is a fear vote.
What we need now is courage of heart and boldness of ideas. Courage of heart because we've come so far, boldness of ideas because we need to go further.
I could see the Labour Party was modernising, but it just wasn't modernising fast enough, I thought, to bring us victory.
The obvious choice for the party is to go for the safe pair of hands. John Smith, the Shadow Chancellor.
It was sort of automatically assumed that John Smith would take over. And John Smith's view was not that we needed fundamental change in our policy or ethos or outlook. We just simply needed a new leader. Then we could sort things out.
Of the Shadow Cabinet, John Smith is the hot favourite to take over.
I said to Gordon, and Tony did too, Gordon, it's time for the modernisers to take this on. We haven't changed enough. We've got to do far, far more of a fundamental nature.
Tony was saying to him, you should do it, Gordon, and I'll back you all the way. And there was no question in Tony's mind that Gordon was clearly in the ascendancy.
John Smith had flushed out this possibility of Gordon running for leader, and he had confronted Gordon with this and said to him, you're not going to do this, are you? Because I think it's my turn. My time has come.
There was never any chance that I personally would ever think of standing against John Smith.
John Smith is elected the leader of the Labour Party.
John Smith was my friend, he was my colleague, I'd worked with him for years. I wanted to support him, I knew we could work well together. And I think anybody who talked to me knew that I was never going to do that.
How do you feel?
Well, I'm delighted. I've been a member of the Labour Party all my life.
It had a profound effect on Tony. He thought that if Gordon wasn't up for running because he'd previously made a commitment to John Smith, perhaps he never would. And I think at that moment, the scenery shifted in Tony's head.
It's not that my respect for Gordon was any diminished at all, but I started, I guess, to feel that the change that we needed was change that I understood very clearly. And I just thought someone's got to go out and articulate that case.
Just after John Smith had been elected as the leader of the Labour Party, the Sunday Times magazine front page cover. The leader Labour missed. I can remember it, because I can remember, John Smith people ringing me up and saying, No, it was, and Gordon. Gordon's people were not very pleased by that.
Labour MPs voted for 18 places in the shadow cabinet.
Tony Blair, who came second, will become Shadow Home Secretary. And Gordon Brown will be Shadow Chancellor, and so lead Labour's assault on the government's economic policy.
Tell me when you're on.
Yeah.
I've got to get this sorted out.
When I started working for Gordon, he was already an extraordinarily decisive politician. Gordon figured out a lot of his thinking by sitting at that word processor, typing on the screen. And given his brief as Shadow Chancellor, set himself that task of doing whatever it took to win back the trust of the British people in relation to the economy.
The conclusion that Gordon reached was, if you couldn't persuade the British public to trust you with their money, if you were just seen as the party which always raised tax, that threw money at problems, then it wasn't going to work.
So I said, no more of this tax and spend. And these were very tough economic decisions that most of the members of the Shadow Cabinet and lots of members of the Parliamentary Labour Party didn't agree with. And it was a very difficult time for me personally, but it was the right thing to do.
To modernise policy and organisation is not to change or dilute our socialist values. It is instead to revivify them and make them relevant for the new challenges of a new generation.
Tony Blair had this job as Shadow Home Secretary, but the truth is he was pretty depressed about the direction of politics.
Oh shit, I don't know. I
remember him sitting in his office sometimes just literally, or for comic effect, but literally banging his head on the table.
On this side of the wall, and just bobbing down.
He saw his 40s stretching out ahead of him, potentially just being stuck in more opposition. Although he was friends with John Smith and liked him enormously as a person,
a difficult economic situation is to seek to improve it. I do not believe...
he was frustrated that simple changes weren't going to happen.
I think with intelligence...
John's line to him was always, be patient, it's okay, don't frighten the horses.
For both Tony and Gordon, maybe Tony more than Gordon, John gave the impression, though this wasn't really his view, that if we simply keep on plugging away at the Tories, we shall surely prevail. Both Tony and Gordon knew, rightly, that wasn't ever going to be enough.
President-elect Bill Clinton promises a new direction to change America after his landslide victory.
The American people have voted to make a new beginning.
For me, fundamental change in the Labour Party was essential.
God bless America. Thank you all.
And Bill Clinton really developed a new Democrat platform that seemed to me completely in line with what we needed to do in the Labour Party. And so I saw in him a soulmate immediately.
I'd met Bill Clinton some years before, actually before Tony did. Clinton had only won the election because of the economy. Labour's Achilles heel was the economy. Unless people knew we were sorting this out, there was going to be no progress for Labour, in my view.
Welcome to this week's look at politics in the United Kingdom.
Mr. Anthony Blair, what brings you to the United States?
We've been talking to some people partly about the strategy for the election campaign.
One of the things that I'm here to do is to meet people to talk about economic policy.
I was at the time the deputy ambassador, so I set up a lunch
in my house. The Americans were actually as much interested in Blair and Brown as they were in the Americans. Blair did all the talking. And Gordon Brown just sat there, listening. Blair had the gift of the gab, the ability to articulate ideas in a very, very fluent, and I would say American style. I think if God had picked up Tony Blair and put him into the American political system, Blair could have become president of the United States.
I always remember John Smith called me up and said, why are these two going to America? Why are they going to do all this sort of Clinton stuff, all this modernization stuff? We don't need any more boat rocking.
There was still a lot of people who regarded the American Democrats as essentially another form of conservative. But, I mean, if I'm absolutely frank about it, it didn't trouble me much at all because it was so obvious we had to learn from them.
Tony Blair, there's a fearful old row yet again in the Labour Party. Senior colleagues attacking you and saying that you're engaged in a conspiracy to destroy the soul of the Labour Party. What's your response to that attack?
There is a conspiracy, actually. It's a conspiracy to make the Labour Party capable of winning the next general election. And it's
His big learning from the Clinton experience was that you won elections from the centre ground. And he was just incandescent with rage that certain just obvious issues that Labour should own equally to the Tories, like being tough on crime, had just been given away.
The muggers who beat up pensioners in their own homes. The racist thugs who think a weekend sport is to beat up a defenseless black or Asian kid. The place for these people is out of society until they...
He was building up a formidable sort of political reputation for himself.
Labour is the party of law and order in Britain today.
This idea that Gordon was always in the ascendancy and Tony, the balance was tilted.
Warm applause there from the leader, John Smith.
I regret to have to report to the House the death of the Right Honourable John Smith, QC.
The news of his death stunned Westminster and united in sorrow his friends and his political opponents.
It's just heartrending news. It's going to devastate everyone who knew him.
I took a phone call about 8 o'clock in the morning from Gordon, who was in tears. And his first request was, you've got to help me. I've got to write an obituary that is worthy of the man. And I spent most of that day on the phone to Gordon, who was in a terrible state.
I'd met him the night before. I'd been with him the night before. And I remember he finished his speech the night before. And it wasn't his greatest speech, but he had this great line, the opportunity to serve is all we ask. And I remember our eyes caught because he was on the platform and I was just behind, below him. And he was saying, look, I'm really tired. You could see that. It was very personal. It was very personal. I went to see Elizabeth, his widow, and I remember saying to her as we left, it's up to you now. And it really was a very difficult time, but decisions had to be made.
Is there no plan for an executive meeting to plot the next moves?
People are beginning to think, what do we do next? Now that
My heart just absolutely sank, because I just thought, oh my God, it's going to happen now. Tony and Gordon are going to fight for this.
The spotlight now inevitably turns on those who could become the front runners for the Labour leadership.
I got 2 phone calls. One was from Tony. The second call was from Gordon. We immediately started discussing the succession. Gordon weighed up the chances of, I think, first John Prescott, then Robin Cook. Dismissed them both. He never mentioned Tony. There was just an assumption that he, as the senior of the two, would have Tony and me, at his side in order to launch and win the leadership campaign.
What do you plan to do today, sir?
Tony asked to see me, and we agreed to meet in an empty division lobby of the House of Commons. And he said, I think you should know that, my mind is turning towards the leadership and having a go at myself. And I said, well, that's interesting, but, I've spent time, and you've probably talked to Gordon yourself. He said, no, when I say my mind is turning towards it, actually, I want to do it.
It was always, of course, going to be extremely difficult with Gordon because we were close friends, very, very deep personal friends, political friends. And he would have had, I think, a natural assumption that he would be the leader. But I became convinced, I suppose, that I was going to be a more radical leader of the Labour Party in terms of modernising it.
The front runner to take over must be Tony Blair, young, charismatic and a moderniser. But his friend and ideological soulmate, the Shadow Chancellor Gordon Brown, has better links with the party and unions.
I think the thing that took Gordon aback most of all was the reaction of the media. I don't think he had clocked that Tony had become quite the sort of media personality. Gordon, he said, but what about the intellect? And what about the ideas? And what about my performance, in Parliament? And what about this? And what about that? I said, the eyes of very many people, you're simply level pegging. You're the two big modernising beasts of the Labour Party.
There's a lot of hostility building up towards Tony Blair as the media's candidate. His camp is saying that you need somebody who can appeal to the voters.
We were obviously taking soundings, and we thought Gordon stood a good chance of winning. Top politicians want top jobs, and there's no disgrace in that.
I want a new Britain, ready for a new British century.
Gordon had spent his whole political life writing, discussing, researching the best way to solve the problems that the country was facing.
Fresh opportunities with Labour by the million.
So obviously he wanted the opportunity to put that into practice.
I know he thought, could it be done? Could he take on Tony? What arguments would he make? But I think there's part of him which may have been hoping that Tony would defer. It became very quickly clear that wasn't going to happen.
First of all, the Sunday papers today. Blair tops leadership polls, that's the Independent on Sunday. Blair surges into early lead.
The momentum for Tony's leadership really got underway almost immediately. It became unstoppable.
The death of Labour's leader, as his eulogist said, put politics into perspective.
After the funeral, Gordon and Tony had many, many meetings. The pair of them were talking about who would best be able to represent what they knew had to happen for the party to change.
And it was just Tony persuading Gordon. It was his. It was his, and he could do it, and this is what they needed to agree.
I think if it had been obvious that the public would have preferred him to me, I would have been happy enough to step back, but it really wasn't. Now, that's just the way it is, and there's no altering it.
Good evening. The Shadow Chancellor Gordon Brown has ruled himself out of the contest for the leadership of the Labour Party. Instead, he's urged his friend Tony Blair, the Shadow Home Secretary, to stand and promised him his support. Mr. Brown said he had acted in the interests of party unity.
Well, it could have been me. Look, all politicians are different. They've all got different ambitions and different sort of views of what they can or can't achieve. It suited me to get on with the business of reforming the Labour Party. We wanted to get on with the job.
Gordon knew that division between the two of them at that point would be a catastrophe. He wasn't happy about it, but I mean, I think he just knew that was his duty.
What Gordon had gone through was immense hurt. I mean, at first he had been disbelieving, then almost inconsolable, and he didn't know who to rely on. He didn't know who his true friends were.
I think there had been a sense of inevitability that had built up around the prospect of Gordon leading the Labour Party one day, that it must have been incredibly personally devastating to have been set aside in favour of the party's choice, which was that Tony was the right leader at that time.
The results of the election for leader of the Labour Party are as follows. For Margaret Beckett, 18.9%. For Tony Blair, 57%. For John Prescott, 24.1%. I therefore declare that Tony Blair is elected leader of the Labour Party.
Almost 1 million party members voted and gave a huge majority to Tony Blair.
Tony Blair today became the youngest leader the Labour Party has ever had and told his troops they had to work to inherit the nation's trust.
Mr. Blair!
The hard work certainly starts now, Peg.
There's lots of speculation that a deal was done about the leadership.
Gordon told me that Tony had given him a personal assurance that he would only stand for 2 terms. When the time came, he would support Gordon to replace him.
But who knows exactly what was said? Nobody was there other than the 2 of them.
Mr. Blair, do you want to have a drink to your success?
Now, the deal that you agreed with Gordon, what were the terms of that?
So, I didn't want to fight Gordon for the leadership. And, you know, there's always the debate whether it would have been better if we had, but I was at any rate convinced at the time it was better that we didn't. And the agreement was essentially he would be obviously a big partner in the government. And yes, it was always envisaged that he would succeed me.
Well, it was simple and it was straightforward, and I'm surprised it's misunderstood, because basically it was that he would be leader and serve for till the end or near the end of a second term. So you had 10 years if we could win government, and I would be in charge of economic policy and get on with that.
But, you know, it was always important to me, obviously, that for the time I was leader, that, you know, that leadership was accepted.
It was a partnership in one sense, that we were working together very, very closely. But I never doubted that there was one person who was the leader and another person who was, in that case, the shadow chancellor.
I used to write in meetings all the time. And I'd just been scribbling and drawing things, and I just did this NLNB, and then scribbled New Labour, New Britain, and I think it was Peter, and just sort of put it under his nose like that, and he went, "Oh yeah."
I remember heated debate whether it should be new with a capital N or with a small n. In other words, was it an adjective to describe the existing Labour Party, or was it actually a new party?
I mean, slogans both matter and they don't matter. But I sort of felt that one mattered a lot. It was the first big point of connection between Tony Blair and the public.
The Empress Ballroom is filled up now, holds about 5,000 people, and many more are still trying to get into the hall to hear the leader's first speech.
This is the speech where he must prove that he has a map to carry Labour into government and the Field Marshal's baton to take the party with him.
I mean, I know people have said, well, it was just a clever piece of politics. No, for me, the creation of New Labour...
How long? You've got 6 minutes.
It was a fundamental reorientation of the way the public looked at us and in the way that we looked at ourselves. Because the purpose of the Labour Party is not just to shift the Labour Party, it's to shift the country.
And here comes Tony Blair, a standing ovation before he starts.
We have changed. We were right to change. Parties that do not change die, and this party is a living movement, not an historical monument.
This was very powerful. It wasn't just Tony being persuasive, it was Tony being a superb politician.
Some of you, I hear, support me simply because you think I can win. Now, let me say it once. Actually, that's not a bad reason for supporting me. I just like, But it's not enough. I want more. We are not going to win despite our beliefs. We will only win because of our beliefs.
When I looked at the Labour Party, I thought, it's not just a question of winning. It's a question of winning sustainably, where you own an agenda strong enough, rooted enough in people's actual lives, that you would win not one election, but 2 elections and 3 elections.
The next election will offer us the chance to change our country. Not just to promise change, but to achieve it. The historic goal of another Labour government. Our party, New Labour. Our mission, New Britain. New Labour, New Britain.
We had a leader who could symbolise New Labour. People just looked at him and thought, good Lord, if the Labour Party is electing somebody like that, who is so not Labour, as leader, then they must have changed. And indeed they have.
Alistair, you've won, haven't you?
Well, I think we'll wait and see.
Let's just wait and see, shall we?
One of those once-in-a-generation sea changes.
I felt an enormous sense of trepidation. This was my first job in government.
It was important to show that we meant business in the first few days.
I have to say the highlight of the Queen's speech was when the Queen stood up and announced
a welfare to work programme to tackle unemployment.
The spin doctors in number 10 Downing Street hate the spin doctors in number 11, and vice versa.
This is Downing Street, you know, this is not Coronation Street.